So tell us more about this period of Jewish history in the Bible.
Paul, thank you for that question. This is a significant time in Old Testament history. Certainly, as we've been saying all along, there are no Jews technically in the Old Testament, so we wouldn't want to make the mistake of saying that this is a time of Jewish history in the Bible, unless we're talking about Jewish history in the New Testament. But obviously this is a class in the Old Testament. There are no Jews in the Old Testament. So this is just a way to perhaps gently remind the students that even after the exile, these are believers in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how this God had shown himself in Exodus, conquest, kings, and prophets, etc. So, what would be maybe one of the major significant events during this post-exilic time in Israel's journey with her God? Let's look at the slide and speak about the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is living in the Persian capital of Susa in roughly the middle part of the 5th century BC. Let's date him roughly at 450 BC. And Nehemiah is a cupbearer for the king. That means he's in the inner circle, being a taste tester, because there was always intrigue in the courts, and you'd have to have a cupbearer to taste the drink before the king would taste it, lest it's poison, and then the king doesn't die, just the cupbearer. That would be Nehemiah. That's his role. He's a very significant court official in the king's court, Artaxerxes, the Persian king. He hears about Jerusalem not having a wall around the city. So he gets the support of the Persians, which is an ongoing theme during this time. The Persians give him money and supplies and even soldiers to guard Nehemiah as he makes this some 500-mile journey from Susa to Jerusalem. As soon as he gets there, he sees enemies, and he meets resistance. Two of these people are noted for you on your slide, and the upper circle is Sanballat. He's the governor of Samaria, and he does not want Jerusalem to rebuild its walls. Here we already see some of the tension that will come out in the pages of the New Testament regarding the people of the northern kingdom who were exiled in 721 BC, and some obviously stuck around. But after a period of time, they began to be known as Samaritans because their capital was in Samaria. And there's this tension between the post-exilic community in Jerusalem who had known life in Babylon and these people who did not know life in Babylon, who had been around for, by this time, several hundred years. Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, is against the building of the walls in Jerusalem, because he doesn't want Jerusalem to somehow take on greater importance than perhaps it already had in these post-exilic days. On the right circle would be Tobiah. He would be a subordinate of Sanballat. And as Nehemiah tries to build the wall around Jerusalem, as you can see on the slide, these people attack him and try and diminish the plans that Nehemiah would have. But Nehemiah does build the wall around Jerusalem, and he also, along with the ministry of Ezra during the same time, you can see by means of your slide that this wall is pictured in terms of tablets of stone, indicative of the Ten Commandments. This is a huge theme in post-exilic Israel. We do not want to allow another exile to happen. We must begin to follow God's decrees and ordinances and statutes that He gave to us through His servant, the prophet Moses. So during this time, Ezra and Nehemiah not only are building a literal wall around Jerusalem, they're trying to build a spiritual wall around the covenant community so that the outside influences will not diminish and destroy the community as that had already happened previous in Israel's history. Also, on the bottom of this slide, you can see the person with raised hands, a believer, as opposed to a person with the hands on their hips, an unbeliever. And apparently, during Nehemiah and Ezra's ministries, Israelites were marrying non-Israelites. Well, remember King Solomon, 700 wives of royal birth, 1 Kings 11, verse 3, and his wives led him astray. In a sense, that's almost the beginning of the end for Israel. To marry foreign wives means that you not only get the wife, you get the wife's gods and goddesses. That's exactly what Ezra and Nehemiah want to avoid. So, Nehemiah, in chapters 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 of his book, begins to confront this problem. And you can see on your slide that he asked the people to separate from each other, separate from these foreign wives, because that will pollute and destroy the covenant community and the covenant faith. These would be just a few ideas, Paul, when it comes to more of Israel's history after the exile.